but I'm just high school football coach and a former Marine. There's nothing remarkable about me, and it just shows that God can use anyone. If he can use me to change the nation and overturn 8,000 court cases that for religious freedom and give us more religious freedom here in America than we've had in the past 50 years, imagine what he could do with everybody else when they start standing up.
I would imagine all of you are very familiar with Coach Joe Kennedy. Just count the number of times we've had either Kelly Shackelford for First Liberty Institute or one of the individuals that work with him on the program. And we followed from really the very beginning his story, a time in which he, as an 18-year Marine veteran, then became an assistant coach for Bremerton High School on the varsity team, but wanted to actually always have a time in which he would give thanks at the center of the field at the 50-yard line, and that ultimately resulted, as you well know, into a lengthy court battle. And on June 27th, 2022, a little less than 3 years ago, Coach Kennedy received his First Amendment rights. After that, he was then reinstated as an assistant coach, actually did that for one game and retired. And as a result, now is an individual that is traveling around speaking first about his own story, which is incredible, and second of all, speaking on this very important issue of free speech. So, Coach Joe Kennedy, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, good to hear your voice again.
You know, when we talk about this, again, the title of the book and the movie, Average Joe, and that's really the case. If somebody had told you, say, 50 years ago that you would be the center of a national spotlight and that now you'd be traveling around the country speaking on free speech, speaking on religious liberty, speaking on standing up for your faith, I just don't think you would have believed it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have believed it. 10 years ago, it seems so far-fetched and over such a silly thing to fight over and have to make national news over. It's just ridiculous.
Well, if we can, I think most people know your story, but I thought just for anybody, former atheist, really kind of a troubled backstory that you have certainly talked about before. It is something that you oftentimes share when you speak in front of a group. So we can talk about that for just a minute for anybody that isn't familiar with the incredible story of Average Joe.
Yeah, I'm one child from birth. I was put up for adoption. I was in and out of group homes, foster homes, and boys' homes, and got kicked out of just about every school you could possibly imagine. I think it was 11 or 12 different schools. I needed to find something in my life, and I thought that was the Marine Corps, which was a wonderful career, but I lived according to the world, and God was not part of that program whatsoever. And I found my love for the country, love for our Constitution, and I became something greater than myself at that point. And I served honorably and loved it. And then God got a hold of me right as I was retiring from the Marine Corps, met with my childhood sweetheart. And next thing I know, I'm on the altar giving my life to God. And 2 weeks later, I'm getting offered a job to coach high school football. And from there, I think life was absolutely perfect at that point. I had everything that I've ever wanted. Everything was smooth, and I prayed after football games for 8 years, and we were in our 8th season before anybody ever had a problem with it. And then it just kind of all fell apart and turned into an ugly legal battle for the next 8 years.
Well, and again, one of the things we've talked about before, and Kelly Shackelford's been here talking about other individuals that had their religious freedom taken away. And I remember one in particular said, look, I didn't go, and this is a man that was much older than us, overseas and fight in Europe so that I come back and be told I couldn't pray in my particular unit at home. And so there's a sense in which you are a Marine and you were fighting for freedom and you were fighting for this nation. And then all of a sudden, a former Marine, assistant coach in Bremerton High School in Washington State, finds himself in the midst of a controversy. There had to be some discontinuity between the two.
Oh, absolutely. I really didn't know what to do as far as, quote unquote, a Christian. What do you do when your employer asks you to do something that is not right? And So I struggle with it, and would have been really easy to just not fought the school district and just gone along with it and let them take the rights away from me. But if they did this for me, imagine what they could do for everybody. And I've seen the erosion of our constitutional rights as Americans for the past, 30 years since I've become aware of them. And I said, no, as a Marine, as a red-blooded American, that's where the fight was. And I said, I will stand up and I will fight, and I will die on this hill to defend the Constitution and our First Amendment of the freedom of speech and the free exercise of our religion.
I want to get into a few more details about that and then talk about some of these new opportunities that God has placed before you. But, Coach, let's see if we can, for people that aren't familiar, why did you actually decide to go to the 50-yard line and pray? Why was that so important? And I think, again, many of us that have either seen the movie, read the book, or heard your interviews know that. But I know that some of our listeners might say, why was that such a big deal? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it originally goes back to when I accepted the Lord and I made a covenant with him that I would give him my life. Since he called me to coaching, and that was very evident, I was watching the movie Facing the Giants from the Kendrick brothers.
Yes.
And it was a confirmation, and just, I felt the calling of the Lord to coach. And on my living room floor, I said, Lord, I hear you. And I said, I will give you the glory after every game, win or lose, right there on the battlefield. And that's the way it started, was just a simple covenant with God. And a man's only as good as his word, especially with his God. So that's why it was so important. And, on top of that is I always taught my guys, leadership by example, and I wanted to practice what I preached. And here's an opportunity that I was faced with choosing between my faith and my job. And, what was the right thing to do? Well, obviously it's to, you follow your word and you follow your God. And so, I would have been the biggest hypocrite in the world if I would have just down and, this might become uncomfortable, or this might, affect my life in a negative way. But these young men definitely need to know that life has consequences, good and bad. But standing up for what is right is always the right thing to do.
Well, and again, if you think about it, at the time, there were people taking the knee to protest everything from racism to police brutality to the flag or whatever it might be. And yet having grown up in California, my wife from the Pacific Northwest, we know that would be permissible, certainly in Bremerton and other places in Washington, Oregon, California, whatever it might be, or even on the East Coast. But taking a knee to pray was, I think, for some people, too much to allow. And yet, as you said, it went on for 8 years, and it went from just you going out there by yourself to eventually having many of the athletes, many of your players coming out. True?
Yeah, that was one of the beauties of it. It wasn't just our team. They started inviting the other team. And if you can imagine, we had every team in our league out there praying on the 50-yard line after each game. And that was incredible to see these kids going from fist fighting to
wow.
It was incredible.
Yeah, again, I think that's just a good illustration of that. There was a time before, I live in the state of Texas, although originally from California, and they had a case a while back where they said you couldn't have a prayer before a high school football game. And the argument from the Supreme Court is that a Texas high school football game is not a religious event. Well, they've never been to a Texas high school religious event called a Texas football game. But nevertheless, you have those kind of precedents. So when finally, after years of doing this, somebody decided to complain, that's where everything blew up in our faces, right?
Yeah, it actually came from a compliment. Somebody called and said what we were doing was awesome after they witnessed this prayer.
Yes.
And then that's when everybody went sideways on it. And their lawyers, of course, they are so risk adverse. Instead of dealing with prayer itself and educating people on what was being done and what the Constitution says, they took a hard line and said, no, we're just going to remove it. They're under the guise of this separation of church and state and have absolutely no idea what that actually means. It's been, it's just been, horribly done over the past, 50 years.
Yes.
That we really turned it into something went away from its true meaning.
That's right. Well, again, let's kind of summarize a long process of first going to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington and losing, then going to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which is in California, and losing, and then eventually making your way to the Supreme Court. And in January 2022, they agreed to hear the case, and then a ruling came down in June of 2022. But that was a long process, and I think both the book and the movie illustrate some of the tensions between you and your wife because of the fact that this has become so difficult and so wrenching in terms of your marriage and your circumstances.
Oh, yeah. There's no words that could describe it. She was the human resource director for the school district, and we had 2 kids in the high school. So this was immediate effect on our family and our home life. This wasn't something just, that happens to both of us at in our home, and it lasted 8 years. So we lost 7 times on the Supreme Court.
Yes. And
I tell you, that is a long time, and trying to explain to your wife that this fight is more important than everything, even our marriage, that's a hard pill to swallow. But when you put God first, it's amazing what happens. And we finally saw eye to eye in that, and nothing could separate us now.
I thought just to finish it off, take us back to June 27th, 2022. You're finding out about this decision, and it was almost surreal, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I wish I could have celebrated it more. I wish it was more of a victory feel to it, but it was really the biggest sense of relief that you could possibly imagine. Because in lower courts, the way that they ruled was that any display of religion in the public square could get you terminated. And if that would have stuck, if we would have lost at the Supreme Court, that would have been what was on the books forever. And I would have been the one that removed all religious freedom for all Americans. So that was a weight lifted off my shoulders that I did not want.
Yes. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we've also posted this piece, When Your Faith Cost You Your Job, with Coach Joe Kennedy. But it seems that you are also interacting with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries. Tell us about that, because I think a lot of people would like to know what's happening in the future.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me over the years is finding that sense of belonging. I felt like I was really in a shotgun pattern, and I was going here and there and everywhere. And I didn't mind doing the speaking, but I felt like I lost that direction of belonging to something and besides myself. And Coral Ridge Ministries, with Pastor Rob down there, we sat down and did an interview, and we hit it off so well, and we're so aligned in the way that we want our country and our faith to be expressed in life, that it just was a perfect mix. And now I'm part of the team, and I'm really looking forward to traveling with those guys and doing interviews and really sharing the Word of God with everyone.
And again, I think these are great opportunities. So let me just mention that we have CoachJoeKennedy.com, and that is the website. If you also go, we do have a link to his Facebook page and X. If you scroll down a little bit, you will see that we also have the trailer for the Average Joe movie, in case you've never had a chance to see. It's about 2 minutes long, and you might even want to watch it. And I think you were portrayed very well in that movie, and that certainly gives you an idea of what that's like. And then, of course, we have this interview that you've done with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries, which, again, is one that I think most people would enjoy seeing because it's about 25 minutes long, and you could watch that as well. So here's some resources for you. If you'd like to share this tonight around the dinner table, like to share it with others, maybe you'd say, I'd really like to have Coach Joe come and talk about not only his testimony, but we haven't even gotten into some of the things he's been talking about in terms of the need for us as Christians to stand for our faith, the need for us to exercise our religious liberty. Those are resources we're going to talk about as well. Let's, if we can, take some phone calls. Scott, you're on with Coach Joe Kennedy.
Well, hi, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, Scott. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. I want to congratulate you for winning that victory. But it wasn't just you, it was the Lord. But I do have a question.
Amen.
And I say, hi, Kerby.
Hello.
What happened? I know when they were required, the school was required to take you back. And I just heard today that you said you retired the same day you went. Apparently the athletes were not allowed to have anything to do with you or any of the coaches. First of all, is that true? And if it is, did you do any more legal work against that particular district?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Right, yeah, they did not make it welcoming. The coaching staff, they did as good of a job as they could, but the school district itself started implementing all these rules that I was not to talk to any of the players or the parents. I wasn't allowed to go into the locker room, and they took all the fun out of coaching and really everything that coaching stood for. And I thought it was better, since God already just had me return and totally brought me back to my original place and restored everything, that would be a good time to step away. And we have been taking care of my father-in-law down in Pensacola, Florida. So it all worked out really well, and I had no desire to fight them anymore. But I tell you, my friends at First Liberty Institute, they were like, you have another case right here. And I said, let's just let this go. If they want to act like children, let them act like children. I think we did what we needed to do.
Scott, thank you for your question. And again, I'm glad we brought that up, because that was another element. As some people have said, first of all, why are you in Florida? Well, you just answered that question. Number two, how were you treated? And of course, I think we'd already heard some of that, but it was just good to fill that in, because as you well know, Coach Kennedy, because of your national prominence, there have been a lot of misinformation spread around. And that's why I thought it would be helpful to have you on the program so people could ask you a question if they had heard something and wondered if it was true. And so Scott kind of led us off in that regard. But let's, if we can, before we run out of time, talk about where you're going from here, because it does seem to me that God has opened a door. For a while, it looked like that door was closed, and then it looked like it sort of opened a little bit on 2022. Well, now we're in 2025. You actually are part of a team, and there are some real opportunities for individuals that maybe have read the book, seen the movie, or heard the story to have you come and really encourage Christians to stand for their faith. And that really was very much of the interview you did with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries, because, again, when your faith costs you your job, what do you do? And you're really encouraging people right now to not only consider the fact that there may be a legal issue in some cases, but actually to demonstrate courage, because as you said, Joe, you could have just simply said, okay, I'll just pray to myself at the end and I won't go to the 50-yard line. And so talk about some of the messages you're giving now.
Yeah, and that's a great point, is that there was that side of me that completely did not want to fight. These people are my friends. They've been my friends for a decade. We spent holidays together. The superintendent, we go to the same church together. So this was awkward everywhere in our community. So the opportunity now is so incredible, especially for my wife and I. We speak at men's conferences and women's conferences, and we speak together at all kinds of events. And we get to share our story and to just show people that if they stand up for what they believe in and do what is right, that God will always win in the end of it. But to encourage and inspire people, I think that's the biggest thing, is that people are not alone. And a lot of people go through these things, but to be able to fight through and to have the courage that even though you're scared and everything else, is that you just fight the good fight, you finish the race, and you remain faithful, and don't worry about it, because God's got that victory already.
Let's see if we can talk about your wife for a few minutes, because I've been very impressed with her and the resilience that she showed. Again, just put yourself in her shoes for a minute, a listener, because you are actually part of the school district. Your kids are in the actual high school. Your coach husband is taking a stand, and it's not pleasant. And in some respects, I have always appreciated not only your testimony, but I've always been so appreciative of her testimony.
Oh man, I think her testimony is 1,000 times better because God, if you look back on my life, I've been a fighter from the very beginning. God, when he made me, he made me a little scrapper, and I've been trained, especially in the military, to stand up and to fight. My wife, on the other hand, and my family, no, they want to not have any conflict whatsoever. So to see what God did in their lives is just so incredible, and what my wife had to endure on a daily basis at her work. And I encourage people, if you haven't seen the movie, it's not just a football movie. To me, it's a complete love story about showing the love of God and the love of a marriage and what it can really withstand. And boy, she gets extra credit for dealing with me.
Well, one of the other things I thought I might mention is that you do have some of those particular videos. There's one from First Liberty, and again, people that have maybe listened to some of the interviews we've done here on Point of View takes through some of the legal issues there. So that's on your website. And then, of course, we've already mentioned the fact that we have the trailer for the movie, but also that book's still doing pretty well. And it's, again, Average Joe, the inspirational true story of Coach Joe Kennedy, one man's faith and a fight to change the nation. And again, you probably have to pinch yourself sometimes to say, I can't believe that I'm an individual that was used to really set aside a very bad legal Supreme Court precedent known as the Lemon Test, and ultimately win so many rights for Christians around the country.
Yeah, I am definitely the least likely person that I would have ever picked to do this. I would have picked somebody who knew the Bible a lot better, was well more spoken or more influential or something. But I'm just high school football coach and a former Marine. There's nothing remarkable about me, and it just shows that God can use anyone. If he can use me to change the nation and overturn 8,000 court cases that for religious freedom and give us more religious freedom here in America than we've had in the past 50 years. Imagine what he could do with everybody else when they start standing up.
Wow. I would point out one thing that you bring to the table is a great sense of humor. I'm thinking of this interview that you did with CNN, and you're sitting next to Kelly Shackelford, and it's hard for either you or Kelly Shackelford not to break out laughing because the whole time you're doing the interview, you're saying, I just want to thank you so much for standing with me and really supporting my view and everything. And, of course, everybody that knows anything about CNN, they weren't even close to standing up for you, but you kind of did that just because you decided that you maybe yank on their chain a little bit.
Oh, yeah. And, we use the same words that they've been beating us over the heads, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that just shows exactly what America is about, because that does include Christians and our faith and the diversity of our faith in America. And just to throw that back into their face and in a fun way, I thought it was really good to compliment them on that.
Yeah, that was a great sense of humor, and if you've ever seen the clip, it is fun, and they've shown it before in various venues. But let's, if we can, maybe focus on one other issue, Joe, and that is we certainly are seeing some places where there's still a need for groups like First Liberty Institute or Alliance Defending Freedom, or just taking some of the cases that Kelly Shackelford and his team have right now. You have a pastor who has had criminal charges brought against him for opening his church to the homeless. You have a woman in Connecticut, for example, who has a small crucifix at her workstation, and that is enough for them to actually take her off of her teaching duty, although she's been there for decades, because that's somehow an unconstitutional establishment of religion. We have individuals, some evangelists we've talked about, that have been told they can't preach the God's word in certain areas or only in a certain prescribed free speech zone. So you have those sort of high visible cases, but I'm sure as well there are a number of other Christians listening today that find themselves in a similar situation to you, Coach. And so when you speak and even when you talk to individuals, what do you tell them?
Yeah, well, one, knowing what your rights are is something huge. And you nailed it on the head that there are so many cases going on. Just two in my hometown since the past 2 years of a sign being one of the soccer clubs putting a sign up that said Jesus, and they made them remove that. Another kid wanted to bring a Bible to church, or to school. So you hear about these all the time. They're happening every day, and that's why we do need Alliance Defending Freedom and First Liberty Institute, because they have their toolkits on what you can and can't do, and a lot of things could be settled if we just educate people. So that's what I want to encourage people to do, is to be able to know what their rights are and to be able to stand on those. And I have a verse, 2 Timothy 4:7, fight the good fight, finish the race, and remain faithful. Nowhere in there does it say that we have to win that, because the spoiler alert is, God's always has the victory. So we just need to do our part and let God worry about the rest of it.
You know, one of the websites I've been sending people to, and it's been put together by friends at First Liberty, called Restoring Faith in America, RFIA. And the bottom line is this: because of the Coach Kennedy case, as well as a few others that have come down since then, the Groff case and others, there is more religious freedom now in America than has existed in decades. But the way you get your freedom is to exercise it. And so many of these cities and communities and even localities which are told you can't post the 10 Commandments, you know what? Now you can. Some of the individuals that have said, well, you can't have a prayer club or a Bible club at your school. Well, you always have, but now you have even a greater opportunity to do with that. Pretty soon we're going to come to graduations, and you know, Joe, what's going to happen there? They're going to say, well, even if you are the valedictorian, you can't mention Jesus in your speech, and so it's going to be really important for people to speak on that issue. And, of course, even when you have certain holidays coming up to Easter, next year, of course, Christmas, Thanksgiving, well, we have to make it non-religious or secular. No, we don't. These victories in the Supreme Court are only as good as how individuals take that into their local community. And I know that's really what you're going to be challenging people to do as you go out and speak.
Oh, absolutely. That is exactly what we're doing. And it doesn't have to be showy. You don't have to be confrontational. You just have to be bold in your faith. You know, being a Christian or a person of any kind of faith, it's not just on Sunday. You need to be able to wear that on your sleeve at any time. Being a Christian is not a big deal as far as, oh my gosh, look, there's one. No, we should all be living a good Christian life and the principles that Jesus has taught us. And I'm encouraging everybody. And if anybody has a problem with it, tell them to call me, and I will help them out anytime I can.
That's so good. Again, I'm going to let you go, but let me just mention that we do have your website. It's CoachJoeKennedy.com. Pretty easy. And then, of course, we also have the trailer. We have the interview you've done with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries. We're going to be looking forward to the partnership you've developed with them there. So if you'd like to read Joe's story, if you'd like to even read his resignation statement, if you'd like to get information about his book or about the movie, or even book him to come and speak for your particular group, all available at the website at pointofview.net, or you can go directly to CoachJoeKennedy.com. We've enjoyed following your long journey, and we certainly wish you the very best as you go out there and speak to the issue of faith and the issue of religious liberty. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, hope you appreciated the conversation we had here today, and don't forget that if you would like more information about what we're talking about, you can find it at the website pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.